Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dynamics of a Podcast, the only podcast on the internet dedicated to Professor James Moriarty, Napoleon of Crime, and archnemesis of Sherlock Holmes. I'm Madeline Quiñones, and I am joined by my lovely co-host,
Dixie Parkinson.
And this is episode 3, The Second Most Dangerous Man in London, Part 1. This episode, we are going to be talking about Colonel Sebastian Moran and how amazing and overlooked a character he is. Last time, Dixie said that we had a very pro-Moran agenda, and we're going to remind people of that right now.
Yeah.
You have been warned. Also, I'm going to put you on the spot really quick since you just finished watching A Game of Shadows for the first time. So let's just have you tell the audience really quick what you thought about it. Like, we'll talk more in depth about it next time, but let's just like right now, in the moment.
I enjoyed it a lot. So last week I saw the first of the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies for the first time. And then this week I watched A Game of Shadows. And yeah, I thought that it was the stronger of the two and very enjoyable. Jared Harris was really creepy as Moriarty.
So creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I'm happy to see Moran playing a role in it as well. He's so often ignored in those kinds of stories. And we actually get to see him and Moriarty interacting. Yes! So that was great. Like, how many adaptations actually do that? I can't think of any other on-screen adaptations.
Weirdly enough, the Baker Street Boys, in which Colin Jevons plays Moriarty, they interact in that one. Without a Clue, technically, with Paul Freeman as Moriarty, he has a henchman who like sticks to his side like glue called Sebastian, and that's the only name given. So technically there's that. Other than that, I can only think of the BBC radio show with Clive Merrison. And I just, maybe there are some others out there, and I still haven't watched the Russian adaptation unfold, the old Soviet version. So I don't know about that, but yeah, it's pitifully small, the sampling of
not a lot of mainstream adaptations.
No, this was like it. It took, more than 100 years to get Moran and Moriarty on the big screen together. Oh.
And it's so weird because you think it just makes so much sense to have him there.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say don't even get me started, but you already got me started. Oh my gosh, it's just, yeah. I mean, once again, I'm gonna harp on this until, like, either until the day I die, or else until the fandom finally takes this seriously. Holmes calls Moran Moriarty's bosom friend. That's not something that's, like, up to interpretation. It's very specific meaning. That's the old-fashioned way of saying best friend. You can tell I got strong feelings about this. Well, I mean, too, Moriarty is clearly a dark mirror of Holmes. Yeah. Moran is just as clearly a dark mirror of Watson.
Yeah.
Their relationship should also be a dark mirror, and I believe it is. They are good friends. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just wrote a whole short story about this, and really actually put myself through a lot emotionally doing it. But yeah, just like it was about Moran grieving for Moriarty and trying to move on from this loss. And it's like it and I mean it's interesting because at the same time Watson's doing that too, but unlike Watson, Moran isn't gonna, he's not gonna get a happy ending, and that's really sad.
Yeah.
They're terrible people, but it's still sad.
Mhm.
Okay, so so let's talk properly about the canon character who first shows up in, I mean, technically it's the only time he shows up in The Empty House, first published in September of 1903. And it's the story that properly brings Sherlock Holmes back to life, and then kickstarts the rest of the canon. And then from then on, Doyle is going to be writing Holmes stories up until 3 years before his death. So that's a long time. And Moran is the villain of The Empty House. And that's the thing. It's like technically Moran is technically in an adaptation that would have the both of them. Moran is a supporting character to Moriarty, but in The Empty House, he's not a supporting character. He's actually the villain of the piece.
Yeah.
He's already committed a crime, and then he also tries to kill Holmes. And to be fair, I can't even blame him for trying, because Holmes is responsible for the death of his best friend. So, it's like we wouldn't, let's say, in another universe, Moriarty killed Holmes, and like, what would that do to Watson? What would he do? If like Moriarty
I think
survived
he would absolutely try to kill Moriarty in that instance.
Yeah. So, so yeah, there's that, and also it's the fact that Moran tries to kill Holmes for that. I think is proof positive that he cared about Moriarty. Like, you wouldn't try to murder somebody for killing somebody you didn't like.
Yeah, when I was rereading the story just a little earlier, I found it interesting. It specifically says that like Moran is looking at Sherlock Holmes with hatred. Like, that's how strong his feelings towards him are.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, this is technically not canon. I always have to remind myself of this. This is technically a headcanon. It's technically my headcanon? I don't know. I think I see this circulating around. Or not. I forget about these things. But I do think that, well, obviously, if Moran is the one at the falls hurling rocks at Holmes, because we're just gonna assume that the gun jammed. Like, those things do happen.
Yeah.
Then if Moran sees Holmes having, killed Moriarty more or less and gotten away, I think it's fair to assume that Moran went after Holmes. And I think that's how potentially Holmes got to be in all these crazy remote places during the hiatus. He's really trying to hide. He's also going through a crisis of the soul, but he's also trying to hide. And the more dangerous it is for him, the more dangerous it also is for Moran. And if Moran is chasing after Holmes, he does eventually give up. Again, this is pure speculation. So why he would give up, you know, that's also up to you to figure out as well. But when I was writing my story, I ran up against that wall. I'm like, well, Moran seems like the kind of person who'd keep going, so why does he stop? And I was like, well, maybe because he figures that this is not the best way to go about it, and he should just go home and wait for Holmes to come home. Because Sherlock Holmes was not going to stay away from London for forever.
Yeah.
There's just no way that was going to happen. So, yeah.
Moran's like a tiger hunter, so I'm sure he's used to being patient, waiting for his prey.
Right. So yeah. So let's let me just read really quickly, because I did put it here in the notes. Okay. So so we don't get like in the final problem, we get like one single description of Moriarty straight up front, and it's quite a long one. But it establishes his character right off. In the empty house, we are introduced to Moran and the kind of person that he is kind of gradually. And the first mention that we get of him is going over the case of the murder of Ronald Adair. He and Adair are card partners, and they win a lot of money. The like 425 pounds or whatever that Moran and Adair had won recently before Adair's murder was like 70,000 pounds in more current money.
Wow.
Like, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, I went looking up the 6,000 a year that Moran was getting from Moriarty, and I found a currency converter, and I plugged that in, and it turns out that 6,000 pounds I just went with 1891. In 1891, would be about $930,000 in today's money.
Wow.
Yeah, which I think should still be like well over 700,000 pounds.
Yes.
So Moran, by today's standards, was definitely a millionaire. It's just like, man, that's a lot of money. Like it puts it just like puts it in perspective to look at it like that.
But that also must mean that he was spending a lot of money, because Sherlock Holmes says at the end of the story that like one of his motives for the murder was that if he was exposed as cheating at cards, he would have like no income and he would be ruined. So that means he obviously is in need of money now.
Technically, that's Holmes speculating. He doesn't know that.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's true. He isn't right about everything.
He's not. And sometimes some of the stuff that he comes up with is far-fetched. I think I said this last time, I just can't believe that that Moriarty would hire Moran to like help him handle the running of his criminal empire if Moran was just gonna be spending that money or recklessly gambling it like he's, you know, some kind of upper class, you know, idiot who doesn't know how to handle money. I just don't see I don't see Moriarty is doing that. And to be fair to Moran, I think that he'd be more practical than that.
Yeah.
He has a book, he has 2 books that he wrote, one being Heavy Game of the Western Himalayas and the other being 3 Months in the Jungle. And I'm just like, whatever those 3 months in the jungle were, you'd have to, like, you couldn't be an idiot and survive 3 months in the jungle, you know? So, like, I would expect Moran to be able to handle his money better than that. So, I just wanted to read Holmes's index entry of him really quick, because this is like the most concise, this is a nice concise background for him. So, Moran Sebastian, Colonel, unemployed, formerly 1st Bangalore Pioneers, and we'll get to that in a minute. Born London, 1840. Worth noting, this is one of only 2 times that we get a birth year for a character. At least for one of the kind of like major characters.
Yeah.
The other time is Irene Adler, and she's born in 1858. Born London, 1840, so Moran is 54 currently. Son of Sir Augustus Moran, CB, that's it's like Order of the Bath or something. Once British Prime Minister to Persia. So, like, did Moran live in Persia at some point? That's interesting to think about. Educated Eton and Oxford, served in Jawaki campaign, Afghan campaign, Cherasayab, not sure, dispatches, Sherpur, and Kabul. Author of Heavy Game in the Western Himalayas, 1881. 3 Months in the Jungle, 1884. Address, Conduit Street. Clubs, the Anglo-Indian, the Tinkerville, and the Bagatelle Card Club. On the margin was written in Holmes's precise hand, the 2nd most dangerous man in London. So that's a nice, concise description of Moran's past. It's interesting because it sort of like vaguely mentions the tiger hunting, but that's not really a part of that description. That comes in other places. So like I said, Moran's, like, all the descriptions of him are just kind of spread throughout like the second half of the story. And also, I feel heretical for saying this, but I think that Moran is a better fleshed out character a little bit than Moriarty. We actually, like...
I mean, to be fair, Moriarty was created for one purpose, and that was to kill Sherlock Holmes.
It's like, well, too, we only see Moriarty really from Holmes's perspective, and Holmes's perspective is always a little bit dry. It's not entirely unsensational, which is really funny since he twits Watson about that. But Watson is definitely the better descriptor of the 2. And oh my gosh, I love this. It was a tremendously virile yet sinister face which was turned towards us. With the brow of the philosopher above and the jaw of the sensualist below, the man must have started with great capacities for good or evil. But one could not look upon his cruel blue eyes with their drooping cynical lids, or upon the fierce aggressive nose and the threatening deep-lined brow, without reading nature's plainest danger signals. So that's Watson describing Moran, and that's an amazing description. Like, it sounds, the first part sounds so silly. And it leans really heavily into phrenology, but nevertheless, we are meant to take it that this is, the way that that Moran is. And oh my gosh, that bit always gets to me.
I knew I was gonna laugh when you read the description.
Oh, goodness sakes. So what I get out of this is that if your Moran is not played by a total hottie, you're doing it wrong. Of course, like the next minute, Watson also calls Moran elderly, and it's like, dude, he's only 54. Like, even back in a time when, the life expectancy was lower, it wasn't lower because people didn't live to an old age. It's because a lot of kids died young, and a lot of women died in childbirth. Like, that skews things. And then a lot of men died in war. So that skews the life expectancy. But plenty of people, if they survived childhood, they made it to their 50s and later. So 50 is not,
especially if you're wealthy, you've got good food,
right,
access to better medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so, who you calling old, Watson? You're only about 10, 14 years younger. Okay, so I have been reading some terrific material about Moran in general recently, and in preparation for this episode. I have gotten some lovely books from the BSI Press, and I highly recommend them as practically required reading for a Moran fan. If you want to know more about just the reality of stuff that he was part of. Moran is way more grounded in real events than Moriarty is, which is interesting and pretty cool. So first, but these are without their slip covers because I don't want to damage the slip covers, and also because the binding is gorgeous. But the first book is, let's see, Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires, the Military and the Sherlockian Canon, with this lovely little illustration down here. The second book, and this is super cool, as part of the BSI manuscript series, where they scan the original manuscripts of the canon and put them into a book, annotate them, and have people write essays about stuff. So this is Out of the Abyss, the manuscript for The Empty House, and you get this lovely, this is Doyle's handwriting. Let's see if I can get it close to, there we go. And it's Holmes saying, I seem to hear Moriarty's voice screaming at me out of the abyss. Just absolutely gorgeous. Let me show you really quick. Scanned page of the manuscript, sort of like that. Sorry, I can't see terribly well what I'm doing. But anyway, this is annotated, and I actually barely touched my new annotated Sherlock Holmes for this episode because there was so much stuff in these two books. So happy. So, let's see. So there is this one note getting into Moran's biography here in The Empty House, In Out of the Abyss. First Bangalore Pioneers is what Moran's regiment is said to be. This is apparently a conflation of Bengal, a district in eastern India, now Bangladesh, and Bangalore, capital of an Indian state of Karnataka in southern India. I'm just going to apologize right now for any pronunciations that I mess up because I really have no idea how to pronounce these words, and I'm sorry. Annotation in Out of the Abyss says that there was a real regiment in the British Indian Army that participated in several of the campaigns and battles listed in Moran's entry, named the 23rd Bengal Native Infantry from 1864 to 1885, and often referred to as the 23rd Bengal Pioneers. So I thought that was cool. It's neat to find those, real historical ties to stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see. Quick note about the Great Mutiny in India. It started in 1857 and ended a year and a half later. And for what it's worth, Moran would have been 17 when it began. So he was probably joining the army, I guess, sometime after the mutiny. But it was just interesting to think about, like, he was still technically a kid when that was going on. Dispatches. That was a really interesting note. Dispatches are reports by a senior officer sent back to high command in which a soldier's exceptional actions are highlighted. Dispatches from the British Army were published in the London Gazette. It's very good publicity for a British soldier to be mentioned in those things. So if Moran is mentioned in them, then he was up to some pretty amazing stuff, apparently, on the battlefield. Which, it's like, he's built up as being this heroic figure prior to meeting Moriarty, and it's really interesting. Holmes even says, up to a certain point, he did well. He was always a man of iron nerve, and the story is still told in India how he crawled down a drain after a wounded man-eating tiger. Which technically doesn't say why he did that per se. I'd like to think that he was just trying to rescue the tiger and not like get it out of there merely to kill it.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I think that probably he was a better person at that point. Like, I genuinely think, like, your mileage may vary on how good a person he was, specifically when he was a commanding officer in an occupying army. Like nowadays by our standards, that's not a great thing to be. Yeah. but nevertheless, it's like he doesn't seem to have become openly criminal until, and not that he was ever actually openly criminal, but until he met up with Moriarty in London sometime in probably the early 1880s. It would have been after the Afghan War, the second Afghan War wrapped up. But it's like Holmes and Watson, I think in their relationship, they ultimately make each other better. And the interesting thing about Moran's and Moriarty's relationship is that I think that Moriarty ultimately makes Moran worse. I mean, Moran, yeah. Of course, we don't know about the supposed scandal that made India too hot to hold him. But there are some really interesting ideas proposed in Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires. So I am just going to be like referencing these books constantly from here on out because there's so much good stuff. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, where? Okay. These come from the essay Seeking a Kernel of Truth by Jeffrey A. Bradway and Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires. Terrific essay. So, Prince of Wales visited India and did some tiger hunting in like the period of time that Moran would have been in India. There's the potential that he could have acted as a guide and possibly crossed the prince or else gotten entangled in royal secrets. Victoria's son was definitely not the most upright kind of guy, which is pretty ironic considering that Victoria was practically, puritanical. Another proposed reason for Moran leaving India could he have been disenchanted with the increasingly unchecked popularity of tiger hunting. Because of course it's one thing to hunt, but it's another thing to practically kill off the species.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Moran was definitely a part of making tigers an endangered species, but also, did he actually mean to do that? We don't know. Did that matter to him? Here's this one. This one is my favorite, and this requires a total reworking of how you view the character. So this is not something that I accept necessarily as my personal headcanon, but I would love to see somebody take this idea and run with it. Could he have been engaged in the Great Game, the clash of imperial interests between the clash of imperial interests in Asia between Great Britain and Russia? Possibly he could have left India because his activities in subterfuge were exposed and his life was in danger. So he could have been helping map out the region of southern and central, or rather Eastern and Central Asia, as Britain and Russia were racing to try to control each as much of the area as they could. That was a major thing in the latter half of the 19th century. And actually, I've got this very cool book called Mapping the Great Game that is about that topic, and I still have not read it, but I mean to because this sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of Moran being, a secret agent involved in all this stuff.
Mm.
I think that's a really cool idea.
And I mean, that would give him a lot of skills that he could then later use under Moriarty's service.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moran probably technically can't be a sniper because he's a commanding officer. And I don't know that for sure because I still don't know enough about how the army worked back then. But I think probably even now you can't be a commanding officer and be a sniper because that's a very specific position.
Yeah.
But Holmes does call him one of the best shots in the world. So, and I'm very sure that he meant that. He also calls him Shikari, which actually is an Urdu word meaning expert hunting guide. So Moran apparently didn't just hunt; he also helped other people to hunt. And the best heavy game shot that our Eastern Empire has ever produced. Also extremely high praise. Also interesting, I was thinking about this earlier. There are 3 big game hunters in the canon, and Moran is actually the first one. And then much later on in the Mazarin Stone, there is Count Negretto Silvius, who is a lion hunter in Africa. And that's Silvius is actually an XP of Moran because the Mazarin Stone is originally a play that's a reworking of The Empty House, and the play originally had Moran as the villain. So then Moran gets replaced with Count Silvius. And then there's one other character who also hunts lions in Africa, and that's Dr. Leon Sterndale in The Devil's Foot. And out of the 3, Dr. Sterndale is the only one who's not a bad guy. And that's interesting. And I do wonder, I have been learning a lot lately about Arthur Conan Doyle and about how much that man loved sports. I don't know how, though, what he thought about hunting, although hunting was held in high regard back then. It was a very manly thing to do,
Well, back then there was also a lot of people didn't really understand the concept of extinction. This was an interesting thing I learned once, is that they didn't really think of the fact that you could hunt out an entire species and they could all be dead. Especially the people going to Africa, and there used to be these huge herds just covering the plains there, and they shot so many of them because they thought, oh, well, there always going to be more.
It's look, just because rabbits are always going to be around doesn't mean everything will be. Yeah, but that definitely makes sense. So since we're on the topic of Moran hunting, I want to bring up another fictional character. We talked about this recently, because this is totally a tangent. I take full responsibility for that. But so this gets into Moran being the Great White Hunter trope, which is basically a dead trope nowadays because values have moved on. But let's see, according to TV tropes, the heroic counterpart to the egomaniac hunter and evil poacher, the Great White Hunter, is a heroic big game hunter. He is most likely a gentleman adventurer, but he could also be an earthier type who leads safaris for a living. Either way, he will be an expert tracker, a crack shot, and skilled at wilderness survival. So somebody on TV tropes actually listed Moran under egomaniac hunter, which is like the evil version of the trope. I think that's unfair because Moran was hunting like before he went wrong. And there's just no evidence that that it was anything like I mean, technically we don't have enough evidence either way, but there's no evidence it was like malicious on his part or anything like that. So this brings me to the other fictional character that I wanted to bring up. So a couple of years ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, was when I personally watched the Jurassic Park trilogy for the first time. Yeah, it took me a really long time to get around to it. And so, you know, being a Sherlockian, we Sherlockians have this thing of like looking at something and seeing Sherlock Holmes stuff in it, whether there's actually Sherlock Holmes stuff in it or not. It's just a thing. Like I keep hearing, like I've been listening a lot lately to, I hear of Sherlock everywhere. People really do hear of Sherlock everywhere. They see stuff in everything. I'm not the only one. So when I was watching The Lost World, Jurassic Park, which is the second movie, there's the hunter Roland Tembo, who just he just made me think of Moran as like a more heroic version of Moran, or maybe just simply Moran as he used to be. But I didn't copy the quote. It's such a good quote, but basically, like, you know, Tembo says at one point, the most dangerous predator the world has ever seen has come back into existence, and now the second most dangerous predator the world has ever seen should hunt him down. It's like this weird. He's got these like old-fashioned values, clearly, but there's just this odd kind of nobility about him. At one point, one of the more heroic characters, Nick Van Owen, says, "The animal exists on the planet for the first time in tens of millions of years, and the only way you can express yourself is to kill it." And Tembo says, "Remember that chap about 20 years ago? I forget his name. Climbed Everest without any oxygen, came down nearly dead. When they asked him, they said, 'Why did you go up there to die?' He said, 'I didn't. I went up there to live.'" And I just feel like like that is what I feel like Moran is like. At least that's what I want Moran to be like. Like, there's a certain amount of nobility in that, and I think that Holmes pretty much expresses that same sort of, like, the way that he describes Moran. He's like, he did well up to a point. Like, he used to be a good person. And so he's fascinating to me as like somebody who was a more heroic figure and went wrong. I think that's really why I'm drawn to him. Like, we don't really have that kind of backstory for Moriarty. I mean, Moriarty wasn't always a criminal, but he was just a professor. You know, probably heroically teaching students math. Oh, sure, we'll go with that. But you know, you can on alternatively, you can imagine Moran like actually saving lives on the battlefield.
Yeah, this was something I was thinking about. Like, what do you suppose Moran's like? Does he have like a code of ethics even now, like working for Moriarty?
You know, I don't know. That's what I wonder about. It's like, I mean, I think it's more or less clear that he did formerly. I think that, you know, Moriarty had his own code of ethics. Because I mean, like, he allowed Holmes to write a farewell note to Watson. You know, he didn't have to do that. So, you know, sorry to keep talking about the story that I just wrote, but it's relevant because it's a lot. It covers a lot of what I've been thinking about. Like, I've had Moran on the brain recently because I knew that this episode was coming up, and also because I was writing the story. So I've been thinking about him a lot for the past few months. And something that I did think of was that knowing that Holmes was alive, he could have gone after Watson. He could have gone after Watson either to kill him outright or to use him as a hostage.
Yeah.
And he didn't. And I can't believe that that would not have occurred to him, because Watson was definitely a known quantity, even if he wasn't before 1891, which I don't believe. You know, starting in July of 1891, he publishes The Scandal in Bohemia and starts publishing, you know, the first 24 short stories. Like, Watson actually puts himself out there as being in close connection with Holmes. There's no way Moran would have missed that. So the fact that Moran did not go after Watson tells me that he had some kind of ethics. And you know what? I know that's a reach. I know that's extrapolation. That's major extrapolation. I understand that. But if you want to, you know, actually try to make sense of these stories, then you have to make sense of these stories. And however that works, you are going to be putting a lot of stuff into it that isn't necessarily there.
I mean, I don't think it's hard to put more thought into it than Doyle did.
You know what? Okay, to be fair though, Doyle didn't put zero effort into the empty house. Because he is deliberately, I think it's very safe to say he is deliberately mirroring Watson with Moran.
Yeah.
I mean, they both serve in Afghanistan and India, for gosh sakes. And also, this was like the one time ever that Doyle was careful with his dates, because The Empty House takes place in April of 1894. This is significant because the final problem was not published until December of 1893. So if Holmes is going to come back to London, it had to be after the final problem was published. And in canon, that is actually what happened. So that tells me that Doyle was thinking about his dates for once. Like, one shining second.
Well, good for him.
Oh. So, yeah. Actually, while we are talking, sort of been talking about Moran, like shooting and stuff, which there's a lot of Moran shooting in Game of Shadows, and I love it. we'll have to talk about that more next episode. But it's like when I was doing my Twitter my tweet along as I was watching rewatching the movie recently, I kept like posting shots of Moran, you know, like it's just like, yes. Okay. I'm gonna stop being weird and find this very cool annotation here in Out of the Abyss. So this is about the bullets that Moran used in the air gun. Because okay, so soft nose or expanding bullets. They're manufactured either with a soft point or a hollow point designed to expand upon impact, thus causing more damage to the object they strike. So, you know, of course, different guns fire different calibers of bullets. Most handguns cannot fire a bullet that is as big as a rifle can fire. And of course, you don't like if you are not going to use the same rifle for hunting a tiger that you do for hunting deer. You definitely want a bigger shot to do that. And as far as people getting shot, of course, the smaller a bullet you get shot with, the more chance you have of surviving. The bigger bullet you get shot with, the less chance there is of your surviving. And a bullet that can be fired out of a small gun but expand is a very valuable weapon. And so there's some talk here about like these bullets called dum-dum bullets. But actually manufactured in the town of Dum Dum in India. So this is D-U-M. That's how it's spelled. But I know it sounds funny. But these bullets were not developed until 1896, 2 years after Adair's murder. But this is not the origin of expanding bullets, as is often claimed. The expanding nature of soft core or hollow point bullets had been known by hunters for several decades, and that is likely where Moran learned the technique, which totally makes sense because, you know, he's an army man, so he is gonna know and probably kind of be keeping track of like all major developments in weaponry. So here's an interesting note. Use of expanding bullets during warfare was prohibited by a declaration of the Hague Convention in 1899, taking effect in September 1900. This declaration was not signed by the United Kingdom until 1907, and the United States never did sign it, but apparently abides by the declaration. So worth noting that Conan Doyle got into an argument with another passenger over an accusation that British soldiers used expanding bullets against the Boers. This is in, you know, the early 1900s. So basically, in 1903, when Doyle is writing this story, he's aware of these bullets and what they can do. So that's interesting. And that is all that annotation. I just thought, you know, the reality of the bullets themselves was interesting. And I don't know, for some reason I just love the air gun too. I think, is it actually part of the cane? See, now I've got to look. I should have checked this earlier. Yeah, in his hand he carried what appeared to be a stick, but as he laid it down upon the floor, it gave a metallic clang. So yeah, it is like Granada, where the gun is actually, or the barrel of the gun is his walking stick.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so cool. I love like Victorians and their weapon toys. They were so imaginative and inventive with those.
And I'm pretty sure when I read the story earlier, it says that Moriarty had it specially made for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's completely silent, which is a huge deal back then, because guns were like the technology of having silencers on your guns was, I think, not well developed back then. So for Moran to have a totally silent gun was a huge deal. But yeah, I love wrote a silly story in which Moriarty gave Moran the gun for Christmas.
Very wholesome Christmas present.
Like this, you know, this weapon is so cool. I can just imagine Moran going like, I love it. He's like, best present ever. Yeah, but yeah, I love it that was something that Moriarty commissioned for him specifically. And it's like, did Moriarty even have something in mind for him, or did he just want Moran to be prepared? Like, I love the idea that maybe like Moriarty just wanted it for him. So let's see. There. You have been jumping all over the notes, which is fine because the notes jumped all over the place. But there was something. Oh yeah. So this is something that came up in Colonels, Corporals, and Commissionaires, specifically the essay, The Construction and Connections of Conan Doyle's Colonels by Rossi Davies. And the essay talks about a couple of different colonels in the Sherlockian canon, and then talks about a colonel who was written for a non-Sherlockian story that Doyle wrote called, I think it's called That Veteran. And in it, there is a flashback to a point in time during the Crimean War. And there is a colonel called Colonel Mancour, who is kind of a jovial fellow and also like an extremely good shot. And he ends up killing a Russian sniper who's been causing the British a lot of trouble in that particular trench. And Ross Davies theorizes that basically like Colonel Mancour could have been like the prototype Moran, which makes sense to me because we know that Doyle recycled ideas a lot. Like, I think that the plot of the Red-Headed League was used at least one more time. I think I've heard it said that it was reused twice, but I can't. Definitely the Three Garridebs. I cannot remember another story that used that plot. But Doyle does recycle plots and characters. So, recycling one of his colonels makes perfect sense to me. And also, I will be posting this in the show notes, but you can read that story for free online at arthurconandoyle.com. It is called That Veteran, and it's the scene that I'm talking about. I actually haven't read the whole story. In that one scene, it's just a brief part of it, but it is definitely worth reading that part because it's actually quite funny, because the colonel is also like betting with this other guy about if he can make the shot or not, shooting the sniper. It's really funny. So there's that. Like I said, that'll be in the show notes. Also, going totally away from the topic of Moran shooting, there's one other note that I had to get in that about Moran's actual surname. Oh, actually, two notes about Moran's name, but the surname note first. Moran can be of Irish origin, or it can be of French origin. I'm inclined to think French, and I'll get to that in a second. But the thing is, if Moran is an Irish name, it's actually pronounced Moran. So there's emphasis on the second syllable. And Moran probably means big or great. The French variation, it's actually a variant of the name spelled Morant, but because this is French, the T is silent, and it is pronounced Moran.
The French love not saying letters.
Well, my sister explained to me that if there's a consonant on the end of the word, it's not pronounced. If there is a vowel on the end of the word, then the last consonant is pronounced. And I'm just like, you're just blowing my mind here.
I know, because I've been like learning a bit of French on and off for a few years, and when you hear it, the word spoken, it's so different to how it's spelled, because there are always so many letters that they don't say.
I'm reminded of Professor Higgins from My Fair Lady. The French don't care what they say as long as they pronounce it correctly. Oh yeah, I made a mistake just now. I said that the Irish version has emphasis on the second syllable. It's the first. Irish is first syllable. French is second syllable for emphasis. So that's the difference between the two. Anyway, French version of Moran could mean steadfast, enduring. There's kind of like some etymological tangles when it comes to each variation of the name. So there's like, I guess there's not a strict definition either way, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, the other note about Moran's name is that originally his name was supposed to be Aloysius Moran. Oh my goodness, Aloysius Moran. That sounds like your kindly uncle, your eccentric, wealthy older uncle. And then Doyle changes it to Sebastian Moran, which is much better as a more sinister sounding name. Sebastian Moran definitely sounds like somebody you should watch out for. Just love that. Aloysius, like,
at least he didn't default to James again.
Oh my gosh. That would have killed me. That would have killed everybody. Oh my goodness. One thing that we and I mean, we could get into it ad nauseum because we already talked about it, or we could not. Just about Moran being overlooked in fan works and adaptations and such. Which technically could be a conversation for next time, since we are, or could be continued next time, since we are talking about Moran in adaptations next time. It just bothers me. I don't understand it. Yeah. I don't understand why he gets left out. It just...
I mean, both Moriarty and Irene Adler get used a whole lot more in adaptations than they were in the original canons. I don't understand why Moran is used less.
Yeah, I don't either, especially because I think Moran is like a genuinely cool character.
Yeah.
He's like, he's called the second most dangerous man in London. But honestly, I think he's only the second most dangerous man in London because Moriarty is the one in control of the network. Like, if it was Moran in control, he'd definitely be the most dangerous.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't get it. Moran is just like, he's such a badass character. Like, why would you overlook him like that? He's so cool. And also, why would you disrespect him and Moriarty by not having them be best friends? Like, this is definitely one thing that Game of Shadows got very right. So I think that we genuinely covered everything that I wanted to talk about and all the stuff that I found.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to talk about that I was just thinking about after rereading The Empty Houses. Mm-hmm. What do you think was going through Moran's mind at the end of the final problem? Like, what sort of conversation did he and Moriarty have before Moriarty goes to confront Sherlock Holmes?
That had to be a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Because I don't think... I think that Moran is probably way more aware of what's going on than poor Watson is, because Holmes is leaving Watson in the dark, but I think that I get the feeling that Moran would probably, even if Moriarty was trying to keep Moran in the dark, Moran would be more pushy. And there's not really any sense in keeping Moran in the dark anyway about any of what's going on. So I can only imagine that, like, Moriarty is like, so I'm going after Holmes, don't follow me. And Moran is like, I'm coming with you. And Moriarty is like, okay, fine, don't interfere. And Moran is like, Moriarty is like, no, you promise. You got to promise on this one. And I think that's what happened, which is really sad.
Yeah.
It's like, but I can't imagine it going any other way. You know, like, I mean, unless maybe, either way, I think Moran's gun did jam since he's throwing rocks at Holmes.
Yeah.
But, it's either Moriarty made Moran promise not to interfere, or else Moran was gonna interfere with her without a promise and was unable to. But I think that it would have been the hardest thing he ever had to do, but I think that he would have kept his promise because this is his best friend asking him to do this. So Now I'm sad again.
I'm sorry.
Oh, but you know what? That does bring up something that I was thinking about earlier, which is in his last vow, which takes place in 1914. Holmes refers to Moran as the living Moran. So clearly Moran did not hang for Adair's murder. And to be honest, now I'm wondering, and I'm not seeing anything like in any of the places that I was looking, I wasn't seeing anything about what exactly might have happened. Like, since Moran didn't die, what was the alternative? Like, did he still go to jail? Don't know. I mean, serve a prison sentence. We actually do not know if he did. So it got me wondering, like, what if Moran actually, like, was released from custody after a trial? And the interesting thing is, if he was released from custody, he apparently didn't go after Holmes again.
Yeah, that's what I was. Could he have? So I can't remember. Was he born in England or not? Because you said his father was like a governor or something. So could he have been like exiled out of the country to wherever he was born?
Well, he could have been exiled out of the country, maybe, but he was born in London.
Okay.
The biography does say he was born in London, but his father was British minister to Persia. I'm assuming that means ambassador. So, yes, he could have been exiled. But yeah, either, like, whatever happens to him, we don't know. But if he ends up at liberty again, he doesn't go after Holmes again, apparently, and I think that's interesting.
Mm.
So I don't know. There's just a lot to this character, and unfortunately, once again, there's a lot that we don't know. And even more unfortunately, unlike other characters, there's a lot that people just seem unwilling to explore. And I'm just like, why? Hopefully next episode should be pretty easy to do notes for, because it's about adaptations. And I actually have to finish watching the Soviet version of The Empty House, because I did start it and I haven't finished it. And I also need to check out Yuko no Moriarty, the Moriarty the Patriot anime, because Moran also actually appears in that. And he's like, it looks like he's a fairly big character in that, at least eventually, which is like, yay! So I'm gonna have to finish the one and check out the other, but hopefully we can come back here sooner rather than later. So that is a wrap on our first part of the second most dangerous man in London, the second most dangerous man in our hearts, Colonel Sebastian Moran. We love him. So yeah, and until next time then. Bye guys.
Bye.